Until Then is one of my favorite games I have ever played. It is a heartwarming, heart-wrenching coming-of-age story that has made me cry more than any other piece of fiction. The ending is one of the worst I have ever seen. It misunderstands what makes a game good in the first place, being how incredibly human the story feels. It achieves this by taking its time with the characters. The first few hours serve to immerse us into the mundanity of Mark's life. It makes you inhabit the normalcy by letting you lie about the slides he didn't finish. It makes you live his loneliness by walking through his empty house and opening the emails from his parents working abroad. The world itself is set in the Philippines, the only big change to real life being the ruling, a series of natural disasters that almost ended the world. But instead of showing this sci-fi spectacle, it grounds itself in the personal, intimate consequences. A character whose grandma is in the hospital, another who was forced to relocate. It is in this raw realism that the game places its themes of grief and misunderstanding. Because as Mark tries to cram yet another project, he crashes into one of the people forced to move, Nicole. While bantering about who was in the wrong, Mark calls Nicole a flat tire, thinking it means a boring person, while Nicole interprets it as a remark about her body. This is innocent enough, and they quickly move past it, but it lays the groundwork for the rest of the story. The inability to fully grasp another person's life or their thoughts is perhaps what defines human interaction. And Until Then uses this not just as a theme, but as the fundamental conflict of its story. It's this invisible chasm that swallows all meaning and intention, creating a tragic separation between the characters. This is embodied by the character of Kathy, Mark's best friend and second poster child to the game. She is a ball of energy, constantly cracking jokes and driving banter between her and Mark. She tries to spend as much time with her friends as possible and always finds something to be enthusiastic about. In one of the first real character scenes, we see her and Mark try to stalk the new students out by the convenience store. But before she's there long, she's called by her mother, who seems overly aggressive, and Kathy reacts in a quiet panic. Alongside her continued attempts to avoid her home, it makes it clear she doesn't feel safe with her family. But Mark completely misreads the situation and awkwardly tries to defend her mother's worry. In response to this, from a place of frustration, Kathy tells him, "Lucky you, your mom's not home." It's a scene of tragic misunderstanding, as neither of them recognize the struggles of the other. And really, how could they? How could Mark recognize this suffocating presence when he is familiar only with an empty absence? How could Kathy recognize this void of loneliness when all she knows is an ever-looming fear? When all she knows as home is being with her friends? And it is in this moment that the game gives its tragedy a physical form. The rain is not just weather, it serves as a purifying force, cleansing the stank from Kathy's home. And it is in this rain that Kathy tries to open up, through the only way she knows how to. She tells Mark about butterflies and how they can't fly in the rain. They have to hide, otherwise they get tattered or even die. It's a direct parallel to how powerless she feels against the storm of her family, unable to truly live her life, constantly having to hide out with her friends. And although Mark doesn't realize, him just being there creates a safe haven for Kathy. It's this sweet, intimate scene, infused with an unmistakable feeling of dread. But behind these character-focused slice-of-life scenes, the game starts setting up its main sci-fi mystery, that of the world falling apart. It starts out as background noise, as a class president, Louise, notes that people have been getting false memories, misremembering the weather or getting strong senses of déjà vu. But when Mark visits Sophia's grandmother in the hospital, the game pulls this sense of apocalypse into the foreground. Triggered by a kid crashing his toy plane, Mark gets a hallucinatory episode, as the hospital turns into a hellscape built on the collective fear of the ruling victim. And just before reality falls apart, he sees Sophia's grandmother telling him, "It's your fault." It's a cryptic scene, but if you look at this from an emotional standpoint, where Kathy's quiet, untold pain summoned a gentle rainfall, this is Mark's harsh, internalized guilt for something we haven't seen, seemingly breaking reality itself. But with Louise and Mark investigating it, the game gives you a question. Is the world breaking, or are the people within it just broken? As disappearances start happening, Louise tries to argue for the former, with a theory of quantum tsunamis, triggered by rain, which can distort reality, causing everything from the memory anomalies to the disappearances that have been happening. It remains unconfirmed throughout the game, but it's something to cling on to explain these strange events. And it's within this incomprehensible dread that the game gives us a human solution. But before we get into that, a huge part of what lets this dread simmer is the game's incredible visual direction. The way it uses lighting, color and framing to communicate a character's inner state is a masterclass in visual storytelling. And it deserves its own entire video, which is why I've made one, available right now for all my patrons. So if you're enjoying this video and want to support the channel, please consider checking out my Patreon, link in the description. Yeah. Back to Until Then though, where faced with this looming question, its proposed solution is turning to each other. The grand mystery becomes a backdrop, a looming sense of dread over the main story of Mark and Nicole and their relations to the piano. Because playing piano is the very first thing we see Mark do. It's a relic of his mom, a way to keep her memories alive. But when he plays it at Nicole's house, he discovers that for her, it's a tombstone, an open wound, serving only as a reminder of her missing best friend Jake. It's a horrible juxtaposition between them as they cope in the exact opposite way. Where Nicole gives up the piano as to not face the pain, Mark picks up the hobby in an attempt to feel closer to his mom. And their grief is connected beyond just this parallel, because the memory that Mark tries to hold on to is of his mom playing a specific song. One which, through an impossible moment of fate, is one that Nicole wrote for Jake. It's a piece he never got to hear, as the first and only time she performed it was the day that he disappeared. It is the most literal representation of her grief, which got transferred and recontextualized into Mark's comfort. As they talk more and more, Nicole is convinced to start the piano again, and in one of the most beautiful scenes of the game, they play her piece together. It's a moment of pure catharsis, a beautiful scene of how we as humans connect, feel and grieve through art, as Nicole finally brings herself to play again, and Mark's memory shines brighter than ever. It's this shared passion and grief that is at the core of their relationship, and allows them to open up to each other more. This reaches its climax when Nicole takes Mark to visit her grandparents, but diverts and actually takes him to Jake's old house, trying to find something, anything he might have left for her. It reveals a deeper layer of how she grieves, still in denial about Jake being gone, still searching for a solution to bring him back. But beyond that, she brought Mark here to try and make him understand, not through speaking, but by the physical location where it happened. An empty, broken home. But faced with this denial, Nicole's trauma, Mark is very dismissive about it, trying to escape this house haunted with grief through a hollow promise of staying together. Mark denies Nicole the chance of truly opening up, denies himself the opportunity to truly understand. This, understandably, pisses off Nicole, who lashes out at him and through the depths of her grief and jealousy, tells him he couldn't possibly understand. He has everything she can't have. He still has his best friend. So how could he possibly understand this insurmountable grief? But of course, it's not that simple. Because Nicole's denial, her absolute refusal to live without Jake, is a mirror for Mark. And as they go their separate ways, he decides that he can no longer live in his own delusions either. From under his parents' bed, literally hidden away, he looks through a box of documents. Passport copies, work permits, and a newspaper article about a plane crash. His mother's plane. And as the realization lands, a knock on the door. In the strongest example for the game's solution to grief, Kathy is there for Mark, just listening to what happened. How the ruling had overshadowed any news, had overtaken all the search party, how it felt as if the world had ended. But the worst part being that it hadn't. The world just kept on turning, only without Mark's mom. But similarly to Nicole, Mark and his father couldn't live in this reality. So they kept calling, kept trying to contact her, living in the delusions, the hope that one day she'll call back. And the scene with Nicole gets transformed into another extension of these delusions. As to acknowledge her denial and to truly understand it, Mark first had to stop lying to himself. As Mark opens up the cafe, the dialogue transitions into a letter he writes to Nicole, as he takes the first step to overcome this misplaced hope. He wants to understand, see Nicole for all that she is, flaws and strengths, pains and delights, and wants to be understood in that same way. The next time they meet is at the school prom, everybody there dressed up to the theme of Greek mythology. But before Nicole comes Kathy, the heart of the game, dressed up in a butterfly dress. And she asks Mark to have this last dance with her, so she can tell her something important, even more so than her new crush. Mark and Nicole share a dance together and mend their misunderstandings, as they deepen their relationship and Nicole tells Mark more about Jake. But as the rain picks up outside, Mark sets out to look for Kathy for their last dance. So Mark asks some people at the party if they've seen her, but no one has. Till last she was seen, she was talking to her parents. As a slight horror sets in, you pace back and forth more, asking everyone there once, twice, 3 times if they spotted her, until over the intercom, her parents ask her to come to the side of the stage. Which means that she's not with them either. And the fuzzy feeling from the dance withers completely. You scurry outside, and in a panicked search, you can find one of the butterflies from her outfit on the ground. Kathy is gone. The rain pouring down, you run after her. Mark is back to that time from his childhood. Those final moments with his mom, the fear of losing Kathy, inseparable from the grief of his mother. His guilt from back then remains so powerful it rewrites the world around him. The graffiti warps into the haunting message he's told himself so much. Down the construction site you go, another ragged piece of Kathy's outfit. Down the highway you go, the moon and lamppost faintly lighting the road ahead, until Mark's legs give out underneath him. But just before it all seems over, Mark looks up and finds Kathy, the butterfly, her clothes tattered, hiding from the downpour, hiding from her parents at a bus station. Tears in her eyes, hands stuck out to feel the rain. Kathy is still here. She's okay, she's alive, she's happy to see Mark, and she is alive. She moves into the light, but then the camera switches back to Mark, and his eyes shrink ever so slightly. I should have seen it coming. And Kathy looks to the left, and her expression shifts as well. It's only at that point that everything fell into place. And Mark reaches out his arm, behind which we see a truck approaching. Am I too late? And Kathy tries to run, reaching for Mark. And it's not enough. They tatter, or even At the funeral, Mark receives a CD from Kathy, seemingly from his favorite band. But either through forgetting or not being able to face the grief, he doesn't play until years later, as he's moving out with Nicole. And where the death scene is the game firing a gun, this CD is the impact of its bullet. It contains a message from Kathy, in case she was too chicken to tell Mark at prom. And she tells him how life has been rough lately. With her family, her own house no longer feeling like a home, she tried to find place with her friend. But through Mark's piano and Riddell's work on a short film, she feels like life is passing her by. She sees them running, shining into the light of their passions, and is scared to be left behind. So she tries to find something she loves, anything, so she can really live her life. Run alongside her friends, run away from her family, and run into the light. This is the masterpiece at the core of Until Then. It's a heartbreaking story of grief and misunderstanding that works because it feels human. It's messy, it's cruel, and it feels real. Or at least, up until this point. Because as the credits roll, the game asks one simple, almost insulting question. Continue? And the game makes its first critical error, acting as if the human slice of life story was only a prologue to the clunky sci-fi plot the game will now build upon. Because when you click continue, the world seems to reset. You once again see Mark walk to school and get a message about his slides for a book report. But this time, it's about a different book. And as you play through a similar day, you notice more and more of these small anomalies. Because through the second act, you play in an alternate reality. We get a new theory by Louise, which ends up being sort of correct, about a multiverse theory. The alternate realities getting too close to each other, causing them to merge together. This act of the game still contains the fantastic character writing, but gives more screen time to this science fiction idea. Mark is haunted by the memories of the last cycle, memories of Kathy's death, and the game used this as a harrowing metaphor for how you can't bargain your way out of grief. Because as Mark tries to do things differently, as he tries to be a better friend, be in the right place at the right time, the game makes very clear that this is impossible. In his desperate attempts to save her, not only does Kathy disappear, but it leads to the death of Louise as well. The second act is a self-contained tragedy, and it holds some fantastical emotional moments. But it shifts a big part of the story to the less interesting sci-fi plot. This continues and escalates in Act 3, where the game transforms into a full-on multiverse story riddled with poorly explained plot points and the sheer abandonment of its previous themes. The first sign of this collapse is mechanical. This third act starts with another universe reset, once again triggered by major feelings of grief and regret. But the moment we reach Act 3, the game abandons this sentiment, and the universe starts resetting when Nicole and Mark meet each other, or even when they remember that they exist. Some universes hold on for longer, only breaking when they say a very cinematic goodbye. And some reset the moment Mark and Nicole seemingly wanted to. This throws away the impact of the first two resets, and simultaneously, the game writes itself into a corner. One which it will not get out of. It leads Mark and Nicole to try and fix the world, but before they are able to, the universe ends. And in this void, Nicole and Mark get these 4K visions of each other's trauma, as we see the full backstory of Jake and Mark's mother Maria. After watching these, instead of some grand revelation that explains everything, the game pulls a sort of reverse Deus Ex Machina, as the literal spirits of Jake and Maria speak to Mark and Nicole, revealing that they were behind the ruling so that Mark and Nicole would meet each other earlier in life. They were also behind the initial resets before losing control, causing the universe to fall apart entirely. This makes zero sense. Not just because it's illogical and inconsistent and not properly set up, but also because it once again changes the reason behind the resets. With this explanation, the first two resets are no longer caused by these immense amounts of grief combined with the world being broken. Rather, they are caused by two independent spirits taking it upon themselves to reset the world. It takes the language of the game, that grief can break reality itself, and molds it into this poor supernatural explanation. After speaking with the spirits, somehow, it makes Mark and Nicole realize that they need to let go, not just of their grief, but even of the other, as they get transported to the true timeline, in which Kathy finally survives and everything is fine. There is a couple more big plot holes that this ending creates, but the real problem is how this affects the themes of the game. Because I could forgive all of these holes if the story just held to its themes, if it used this convoluted plot for some grand thesis about its themes of misunderstanding and how human that really is. But in complete opposition to the scenes with Kathy, where they couldn't see past their own experiences, Mark just gets a 4K screening of the complete backstory of Jake and Nicole. Not only does this undermine the required empathy of understanding, but it also tries to convince us that even through the hundreds of timelines they lived together, Mark never got to hear this story from Nicole herself. And in the final insulting irony, the game gives this incredible speech about how everyone wants to be understood, and how the desire to understand is a beautiful fight against the actual impossibility of the task. But only after the game has just shoved the understanding down Mark's throat. It ends up feeling incredibly conflicting, as if it misunderstands its theme of misunderstanding. The game's themes of grief suffer a slightly different fate, that of complete obliteration. Because the first act seemed to argue that connection with other is the only way out of the abyss of loss. But instead of Mark and Nicole overcoming their grief together, the game makes them isolate from one another. Because by letting go of their grief, they get reset into a world with no ruling, thus not making Nicole move and removing all the memories of the other. The final scene of them meeting in a cafe, fated to connect in a healthy world, tries to sell you on this idea that their initial relationship was built on grief, that it was a beautiful symptom of a horrible disease, and ultimately that their relationship was unhealthy because of this foundation. But as with most things in this ending, Act 1 shows us the exact opposite. Through the first act, we see them bond even before they know of the other's trauma. And when they do learn, Mark faces his, overcomes his denial exactly because of their shared grief. It shows us that this connection helps them heal, and then tries to argue that the final step of this healing is by letting go of this connection altogether. At the same time of its thematic betrayal, it is an incredibly naive ending, trying to argue that you can simply let go of your trauma as a way of healing. But the biggest sin of the ending comes in how the game connects this letting go to Kathy's survival. Because through the entirety of Act 2, the game seemed to tell us that grief isn't beatable, that even through the universe itself resetting, Mark can't bargain himself out of Kathy's death. But this ending doesn't just let Mark save Kathy. She is saved through something completely irrelevant to the story of her misunderstanding. It lets Mark save her, not by finally really listening, but by letting go of his grief towards his mother. This creates a weird blame, where saving Kathy is a reward for solving the multiverse plot, and her death is a consequence of the unresolved trauma. This would be bad enough as it is, as it makes a sort of cosmic blackmail of, if you don't get over your grief, your best friend dies. But as I mentioned before, this cosmic blame is fraudulent in the first place, as the ruling and seemingly everything leading up to Kathy's death is caused by the spirits of Jake and Maria. It completely invalidates the ending of Act 1, as the whole reason of why it was so emotional is because it felt real. It was a tragic, messy accident, a case of being at the wrong place at the wrong time. And while Mark definitely wasn't the best friend, it was in no way his fault that Kathy was hit by a truck. It was an atonement to the unforgivingness of life, of how we should appreciate our time with friends and family, because any day might just be the last. Act 3 recontextualizes this as cruel fate, as a consequence from Mark's haunting grief, and by doing so, it retroactively ruins the emotional impact of the game's best scene. Ironically enough, Until Then is a game that misunderstands its own charm. It throws away its human story for the much less interesting science fiction story, and then miswrites it completely. But if you were to take anything away from this video, please let it be the good parts of this game. Even though I think the ending sucks, it's still one of my favorite games of all time, and I wish more people would know about it. I've been Shilsey, and thank you so much for watching.